Oh, guys, you discovered a new tic, and I've been trying so hard to avoid these. But alright, let's talk about it. Now, tics are repetitive motor or vocal actions, meaning movement or speaking, that are considered semi-voluntary. We have voluntary actions, like the decision for me to raise my arm. We have involuntary actions, like the decision for my heart to beat. And then we have semi-voluntary actions that happen automatically, but we can exert some control over it, like the decision to breathe or the decision to blink your eyes. And just like those actions, with many tics, you will experience a pressure and anxiety over trying to suppress that action. So, example, if you don't breathe for 3 minutes, you're going to feel a lot of tension to breathe. If you don't blink for a short amount of time, it's going to start to sting. And if you don't complete this tic action, there's pressure that builds up. It's anxiety. Now, I have had tics since I was maybe 7 or 8, and based on my understanding, I do meet the qualifications for a diagnosis of Tourette's syndrome, but obviously, because I don't have a formal diagnosis for that, I don't want to speak about Tourette's. I want to speak about my own experience. Right now I've been fighting with two particular tics. One of them is simply blinking a lot. Semi-consciously, I can suppress it, but it becomes difficult when that takes place. And the other one is a vocal sort of phonation. Just sort of happens. Like that. Those are voluntary actions, but when it happens, it's involuntary. That one's less frequent. And as you folks pointed out, there is another one in that I lick my lips weirdly and at random intervals. Now, at the moment, these tics are relatively mild. They're not physically painful, but they do make it difficult for me to, say, leave my apartment. Or, sometimes I just go, I can't look at a computer screen anymore because I'm just like that entire thing. There's one particular tic that I had when I was younger, and if I start the action, it will then repeat. And this is one that actually does cause pain. I'm gonna do it just to kind of demonstrate what it's like, but okay, so that first one was voluntary in that I chose to take that action, and then that tic has just kind of been sitting there in the background. It's like, you did I'm gonna do the thing also, and that's a very complex tic in that it's a hard pressure to close the eyes, the vocal phonation accompanied with it, and then a neck jerk, kind of a sympathetic response. My neck's feeling sorry for my eyes. He's like, I'm gonna make myself hurt too for funs. Now that single instance wasn't particularly painful, but when I was younger that would happen kind of in the aggregate throughout the day, causing a lot of embarrassment, and by the end of the day my face would just be swollen and really painful from all of that muscle spasming. Now, I wanted to talk about this because there are a couple of disorders that I think we have a really poor understanding of. There's been a big campaign that we're misunderstanding treating mental health and we're judging people with depression and anxiety, and that's certainly true, but there are a lot of people out there trying to advocate for a better understanding of those. One thing that I think is kind of missing is neurological diseases such as Tourette's syndrome and epilepsy. And while I may not have an official diagnosis for Tourette's syndrome, I am absolutely a card-carrying member for epilepsy and anxiety, so I'm standing on firm ground, at least for my own experience here. What I think that is often misunderstood about these conditions, epilepsy, we think of people being, sensitive to flashing lights. That's a very small portion of people. Tourette's syndrome, we tend to think of people swearing and cursing, because when that happens, it's noticeable, and so we associate that very small subset of people with the entire condition. I think that we tend to be more culturally aversive to disorders and diseases whose symptoms are particularly difficult for us to handle. I've had many seizures, but I've only ever seen one seizure that wasn't myself. I'm unconscious when I have seizures, but watching this other person go through that process was probably even more traumatizing. It's a very disturbing thing to experience. And I think in the same way with Tourette's, when we see people that have these tics and interact in ways that are socially weird, it makes us disinclined to kind of investigate further. And in the same way that people championing greater education for diseases like anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, bipolar, etc., they say that by our cultural actions are actively causing harm. Our failure to be educated in the way that we interact with people, or sometimes fail to interact with people, can sometimes even cause loss of life. And I think we need to be aware that with neurological conditions that tend to get much less of the spotlight, comparatively speaking, the same thing sort of happens. I generally am afraid to tell people that I've just met that I have epilepsy, because my seizures are incredibly infrequent, but the fear and the stereotype that we have about what that disorder is means that people are going to interact with me differently. And I think the same is true of tics, that by having a poor understanding and seeing things as, someone is just not particularly socially aware, can be very harmful. And it's, certainly has kept me in my apartment on days when I would rather be out. It causes a bunch of undue anxiety, which in turn complicates all of the other things. So I think we need to do a better job of this, guys. And whether or not you're particularly educated on disorders such as epilepsy or Tourette's syndrome, all that I would say is to encourage you to treat people complexly and try and be empathetic, and recognize that when people do things that sometimes may make you a little bit afraid or make you feel a little bit uncomfortable or just do things that are awkward, it may not just be because they're weird.